And what I want to do is just talk about the basics of airbrushing with enamels from my point of view. At its base level, it's no different to airbrushing with acrylics. You're going to thin your paint, put your paint into your airbrush, spray with your airbrush, clean your airbrush. Essentially, it's exactly the same. What does change is some of the chemicals that you're using in your airbrush, and that can change how your airbrush is going to perform over time depending on what sort of airbrush you've got. Now, the airbrush I'll be using is this Infinity CR Plus. It has PTFE seals, which means that I can put enamel paints and the associated liquids through there without any concerns whatsoever. Now, to be honest, the enamel paints themselves aren't the big issue, it's the cleaning. So when you come to clean the airbrush, you're using typically something like white spirit, and that can be quite aggressive towards your rubber O-rings and things in your airbrush assembly. So that's why this is handy, because it's got the PTFE seals that will stand up to that. But I do have a couple of tips if you've not got a more expensive airbrush and you fancy having a go at airbrushing with enamels. So let's just start at the very beginning, and the beginning is that we need to mix our paints, and much more so with enamels than acrylics. And it is important with acrylics, obviously, that you shake your paint and give it a good mix, but with enamel paints especially, because of the way they settle, it's not good enough to give them a good shake and you're done, or put a steel ball bearing in and a shake and you're done. You really need to mix them, and you really need to mix them with a good paint stirring device. So this is a Master Tools paint stirrer. Badger do one, I think Trumpeter do one. They're all pretty much identical, so buy whichever's the cheapest. It's a basic battery powered tool. It stirs your paint. It's as simple as that. So for enamel paints, it's essential they've had a good mix up, a really good mix up. If you've not got one of these, then a good stir with something like one of these Tamiya paint stirrers, but we're talking several minutes of stirring so that you're convinced that it's all mixed in and an even consistency. That's your starting point. Happy that your paint is mixed and you've decanted some into your palette, you then want to thin it for the airbrush. Now, I'm not going to say there's a particular ratio you should do. Enamel paints especially can change their viscosity over time, so it's really about getting it to a consistency so it will flow through your brush, and that just comes with experience. For me, I'll be using the Humbrol enamel thinners for this particular job, but you can use white spirit with no issues at all, and obviously you can get low odor white spirits, which helps with all the vapors and things in your room while you're painting. But for me, I've got the Humbrol thinners. That's what I'm going to use right now for thinning that. So that's how we're going to deal with the paint. I'm also going to mix in with the thinners, I'm going to mix in some of this. This is called Slow-Mo Extender Medium. It's from VMS, and basically, if you think of it as a flow improver, that's sort of what it is. The idea of it is it slows your drying time of your enamel. Now, I know that might sound like an odd comment. I'll come back to that in a sec. But it helps with reducing tip drying. So a little bit of that in with your thinner. Treat it as part of your your thinner mix like you might do an acrylic paint where you put some thinner in and some flow improver. You know, it's that sort of process. So when we put a little bit of this in, it just helps slow down the drying time of the enamel. Now, a lot of people don't like to use enamels because they believe that the drying time is slower. And what I would say is you need to think about enamels in a slightly different way. There's a drying time and a hardening time. And if you separate the two, then you can view enamels a bit differently. The drying time is actually quite quick. And in the same way as you can force dry acrylics by blowing air through your airbrush, you can force dry enamels in exactly the same way. And what it does is it dries the surface, which allows you to handle. What it doesn't do is harden it. So if you imagine it's got two layers, and it's like custard going cold. It forms a skin which becomes dry, and then underneath it's still sort of jelly-like, and that dries much more slowly. So you wouldn't want to put masking tape on it for a minimum of 12 hours, 24 if you can, but you can handle it and it can be touch dry and you're not going to damage it actually fairly quickly. And that's why you can sometimes get a little bit of tip dry, because as the air is going through there, especially if you're doing delicate close-up detailed work with your enamel paint, the air going through there is going to force dry the paint on your needle, and that's going to give you problems with paint splatting and difficulty with the flow. So it's always good to have a little bit of white spirit in a separate palette that you can dip your brush in and just clean your needle. But just adding a little bit of that helps as well, and it's not a guarantee it's going to stop it, but it should reduce how much of it that you get. So that's my first little tip. When it comes to cleaning the airbrush once you're finished, which I think a lot of people perhaps get anxious about, the same cleaning process that you would do with acrylics pretty much applies. You want to put a little bit of thinner through, mix your paint cup with a brush and some thinner to thin down the paint further, and then you can put white spirit through as a more aggressive cleaner, or you can put some of this through. Airbrush Cleaner Standard, again this is a VMS product, and it is aimed at cleaning airbrushes after you've had enamel paints through it. The beauty of this product is it cleans effectively, but it's less aggressive, particularly on your seals. So if you've not got PTFE seals, this will really help with cleaning your airbrush and extending the life of the seals. It's also very, very low odour, so that also helps with the whole process of painting with enamels and cleaning. So you can put some of this through, you can put white spirit through. For me, thin it all through as much as you can, take the paint cup off and clean that with a little bit of white spirit, because white spirit's a fair bit cheaper than this, and then take your needle out and give that a wipe with a bit of white spirit, wipe everything down with a rag, a bit of a cotton bud, reassemble it, put some of that through, make sure you're nice and clean, ready for your next job. I tend to leave mine unassembled so that the air can get in and dry and you don't have any liquid trapped in there. But that's my basic process. So with all that said, let's paint that stuff. Right then, let's start by getting our paint mixed and thinned, ready to go. When you're mixing with an electric paint mixer, you've got a risk of paint splattering, especially when you're working near the top of the tin. So I like to just have a tea towel down just to protect my surfaces a bit. Off we go. You can hear how really under pressure, the motor, as it's really struggling. When the motor's running fine again, that's when you know your paint's mixed. Okay, once you think you've got your paint mixed, then we can decant some into our palette. There we go. Okay, so put the lid straight back on, and you notice that I didn't shake the tin before we started mixing it. All that does is get paint all over your lid, and you're much more likely to get a mess of both your tin and your work surface. So we press it down, and then once it's pressed down and we're holding it tightly, we can turn it upside down, and that will just make sure it's all nicely sealed. So that's our paint dealt with. We now need to clean our paint stirrer, and to do that, all I do is give it a whiz in some white spirit. Okay, we're ready to thin the paint. So we're going to use Humbrol enamel thinners, but I'm going to start by putting in the slow-mo extender medium. So you can see it's got a nice little dropper, and we'll just put 2 drops of that in, and that gives us a starting point. And you can see that is way too thick to put through the airbrush. So using a pipette, so we can put in a drop at a time. I know we're a million miles away, so we're going to start with 2 drops, expecting that we'll need at least 4. There's not an exact science when it comes to enamel paints, because the thickness of the paint can vary depending on age. Not even depending on age really, because you can buy them and they have different consistencies, and how well you've mixed the paint and so on and so forth. So it's about getting something that looks right. And I know people talk about the thickness of milk, but milk comes in different thicknesses as well. So I've never found that an easy guide. What I like to do is just wipe the brush on the side, and if the paint quickly goes down to the bottom, you know you're nearly there. And we're not right now. Now if I was brush painting, this would be about right, or maybe even a little bit thicker. So the point I'm making is that when you're putting it through your airbrush can deal with the paint being a bit thinner. So that seems fairly slow running. A little bit more. I think we're nearly there. Enamel paints go a long way because they do need a fair amount of thinning in my experience. Okay, I think that is thinned nicely. So again, just some white spirit, give the brush a bit of a clean. I'm just going to use the white spirit on the brush just to clean the edge of the palette a bit there. There we go. Right, brush is clean. we are ready. So let's just put the thinners away. So the paint is ready to go in the airbrush. So we now need to get ready for airbrushing. Okay, so getting ready to paint. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of white spirit in this palette here. And that's just going to be used for any cleaning that we might need to do during the process. So you can see I don't need to put much in, but we'll keep the bottle and the pipette to hand. It's unlikely that we'll need any more, however. And we'll keep a little brush there, and what we can do is dip the brush in the white spirit and just clean the tip if we need to. Our airbrush is ready to go, so we can decant our paint into our paint cup. So simply going to pour it in. Every last drop in. Okay, we can put that to one side. And we should be ready to start painting. So, I like to take my protective cap off, just so I can get to the needle better. It's actually not too difficult to get in with this cap on, but it's still not easy. Just check that everything is finger tight before we go, and then I like to get a bit of cardboard or something and check that it's okay. Now, I have got my mask with me and I will be putting my mask on, so we'll stop talking in a moment. I'm also putting my extractor on. So it's going to get a bit noisy. Let's see if our airbrush is flowing first. Air first, and then pull back to get our paint. Yeah, lovely, no problems with that. So, let's get going. And we're not trying to put it on like we're spray painting a wall, we're just putting it on in a light layer and then building up the colour. Okay, just going to clean the tip. So all we did was put a bit on and then give it a wipe. You can see we did get a little bit. And you can see you can put it on in quite a controlled way, just like you can with an acrylic. You know, the actual process of putting the paint down is no different. Just building up the colour saturation until we've got it where we want it to be. So I'm just going to use a bit of white spirit to clean the palette. So you can see all I've done is put a little bit in. I've taken, you know, a tissue, but you can use a rag or whatever, and we're just going to wipe that round and get most of the paint off, like so. And then we can get our white spirit that we only needed to use once. And there you go, that's our palette clean. Sorry, I've still got my mask on because we're about to spray. But rather than putting white spirit straight into here, we're going to use a little bit of this airbrush cleaner. So what we'll do is we'll pour a bit in and spray it through. So I'm going to use a pipette to put it in. And the first lot of paint going in there is just going to get mixed around the cup just to help clean the cup. And then as we spray it through, we'll keep stirring. Let me put my mask back on. So we can now take the cup off, give it a wipe, and we're ready for cleaning that a bit more deeply in a sec. I'm just going to clean the thread. Like so, and then again, going to use this cleaner Okay, extractor's off, so hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. So I want to just finish cleaning up a little bit. You can see we've got paint on the top there. So a bit of white spirit on my tissue. And we can just rub that off. There you go, that's perfectly clean now. So we'll put that to one side. And we'll do the same with the paint cup. So just a little bit of white spirit on our tissue and wipe it around our thread. If you're struggling to get in, use a little cotton bud, whatever you need to do. just putting some on with the brush to get in the thread there. I know that's all nicely wet again, so I can just get in there and wipe that off. Inside of our cup appears to be clean, but we'll give it a wipe out. That's our paint cup clean. Bit more white spirit, and I'm just going to now wipe out the top of the thread where the paint cup goes in. That all appears to be clean now as well. So even though my compressor is still on and the air hose is full of air, with my quick connector I can take that off like so and put that to one side to make it easier to handle my airbrush while we just finish the cleaning. So I'm going to take the back off so we can get to the needle, and we're going to take the front cap out, so that just twists off like that, and loosen the needle locking nut and push the needle through, and you can see we still have some paint residue on that needle, which means we've still got some paint in the chamber. So again, a little bit of white spirit. This time I'm putting it on my tea towel. Hope you can see that. Yeah, so just putting a little bit on my tea towel, and then I can run my needle through that, get any paint off. There you go, my needle is clean. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger over the end of the airbrush here, and I'm going to put a couple of drops of the airbrush cleaner in, and then with our brush I'm just going to mix that around in the top there and push that down into the hole. That all looks clean from this point of view, so let's just take my finger off. Some of that can come out then. So that all looks good. Yeah, my cotton bud is fairly clean. So I'm going to use a little brush. We're going to dip it in a little bit of white spirit and just give that a rub through. We can see that's coming all the way through. So that's darkening a little bit, but not massively. Just make sure we've got it in all the threads. Now I'm probably overdoing this, but I rather overdo it than have bits of paint causing me a problem when I next come to airbrush. There we go, that looks clean anyway. Okay, so I'm fairly sure that we are clean now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my clean unused cotton bud in some white spirit and just go around the back edge, the corners, anywhere that we might have missed, and wipe that through. You can see there's a little bit of paint come off. Back in with our tissue just to rub anything out. There we go. So we haven't needed to do a full strip down. It's just been a partial strip down. We can put our needle back in now. And we're just going to lock that in while we deal with painting, cleaning the nozzle. There's no paint on there, so that's clean and okay. So same process. I'm going to put my finger over the end of the nozzle and drop some white spirit in, and then using our little brush, give it a good twist round. So that's all good to go. I'm going to put the top on my white spirit, even though it's low odour. It's just good practice. Let's reassemble our brush now, and then what we'll do is we'll put a bit more airbrush cleaner through it, and then we know it's nice and clean. Okay, push our needle to the front. There we go. Put our needle protector back on because we're not in use anymore, and paint cup back on, and then we can connect it back to our airline. Yeah, all good and working. Okay, I want to just put a little bit more airbrush cleaner through. Again, it's overkill, it's belt and braces. It's just the way I do it. There you go, we have no paint in there, so we're nice and clean. So I'm happy that that brush is clean. That is how I airbrush with enamels. It's not dissimilar to what we do with acrylics, is it? And whilst we were cleaning the brush, the job that we painted has pretty much become touch dry, and if we wanted to force dry it with just air, we can do that in the same way as you do with acrylics. What I would say is, just because it's touch dry doesn't mean that it's set. So if you're going to be masking or something like that, you need to leave it a little bit longer than you would do acrylic paints. But for me, that is done. I've got a nice finish. In many ways, I get a better finish with enamels, or that's not quite right, a more consistently good finish with enamels than I do acrylics. So there you have it. That's me, how I airbrush with enamels. The actual painting process I don't really see as being that different really. It's just showing you how I go about cleaning the brush, which I think is what most people are concerned about. Hope that was useful. If you're new to enamels or you've never airbrushed with enamel and you've been a bit worried to do so, don't be afraid of it. It's easy to do and you can get great results. So thanks for looking in. You take care, everyone, and I'll see you very soon.